Thank you for coming out tonight. I know it's just a week before Thanksgiving and there are exams and all kinds of things that have to be done, but I appreciate your coming. This book, Gerard Manley Hopkins, in some ways it's been 40 years in the making for me. When I was in college, I fell in love with Hopkins quite by accident, really. It was a matter of my professor assigning this fellow Hopkins, my reading the Record of Deutschland, and for me, as coming from a working class background, the oldest of 7 children, my father was running a gas station. I was looking for someone that could speak more to my own experience. I was to find something of that later in people like William Carlos Williams, in the American grain, the American idiom. But Hopkins spoke to me the idea that there could be a Catholic intellectual and a Catholic poet, and that struck me as something that I could use in a very practical way. And so I've come back to Hopkins again and again and again. As I say, my first book was back in 1970. It was a commentary, and I've written a number of books, biographies of other poets, but I wanted to come back now at Boston College and with my son, my oldest boy, a Jesuit priest, to examine this. Someone wrote me, actually Andrew Krivak, who had been in Jesuit formation. He's married now. But he said, you know, Paul, it struck me that the book is shaped like the Ignatian exercises. He said it begins with a sense of the grandeur of God, and it moves through the 4 weeks, and then comes out with a sense of a quiet resurrection. And something I'm not sure that I actually had seen fully myself, but in fact I looked back over the book and I said, yeah, he's right. And I think that the book that was important for me to write first, before I could write this book on Hopkins, was to make the 30-day retreat, to actually make the 30-day retreat, which I made in Gloucester in January and February of the year 2000, under the guidance of a wonderful, wonderful Jesuit father, J.J. Bresnahan, who passed away just a few years ago. But once I went through the 30 days and saw what the nature of the 30 days experience was, then for the first time, I think I more fully understood what it was that Hopkins was about. There was a whole new dimension, a whole spiritual dimension, a sense of composition of place and what that really meant that came to me as a result of that. In fact, I have to say that I had not gone to the Make the Retreat. I didn't bring any copy of Hopkins with me, but JJ gave me his copy. He said, take this, you can use this. And sure enough, I did. And I think by the end of the 30 days, I could feel, in a very real sense, the presence of Hopkins there at Eastern Point. When I came back, I began teaching here, and then I began in earnest with some delays. We had a number of my wife's parents, and then my dad were getting older, and we had to take care of them. But as soon, in between that, I was still preparing to write this book, and then finally, I was able to do it. I'm going to read a few passages just to give you a sense of the range of what's going on here. And the book begins not with, his birth, as you might think, 1844, nothing like that. I begin the book with a kind of overview on the grandeur of God, and then I move to the day that the young Hopkins, who was then 22 years old, and had been raised in an Anglican, comfortable middle-class family just outside of London, converted. That is, where he had the change of heart, where it was important to him to come over to the Roman Catholic Church. It was very painful. It was hard for him because he knew that it meant a lot of doors were going to be closed for him. For example, if he had any idea of becoming an Oxford Don, that was not going to happen. certain businesses would be closed to him. A lot of things would be closed to him because he had become a Roman Catholic. And then on top of that, he really thought for a while he might lose his own family, that his mother and father were so upset with him for making the change, and pleaded with him to hold on, to wait a year, wait 2 years, and he said, I can't do it. And they accepted it, and then on top of that, after teaching at Cardinal Newman, or actually John Henry Newman's oratory up in Birmingham, he then decided that he wanted to become a priest. And what he did was he made 2 retreats, one with the Benedictines and then one with the Jesuits. And although I think he was probably more suited, at least temperamentally, to something like the Benedictine order, there was something that drew him to the Jesuits. And I think it was that kind, what we call the kind of the contemplative in action, I think, was very, very important to him. And so he, in September of 1868, at the age of 24, he entered the novitiate, the Jesuit novitiate, in the south of London, in Roehampton. And the rest is history. He died at the age of 44. He was only 44. Now, this is interesting because in his family, and he was the oldest of 8 children who survived. There was one who died young, Felix. All of the family lived on until their 80s, 90s. His mother lived to be over 100. So there was longevity in the family. But Hopkins, at the end of his life, the last 5 years he was stationed, he was sent to teach at University College, Dublin. That would have been between 1884 and 1889. Now, this is the same school, by the way. Had Hopkins lived just another 10 years, his student would have been James Joyce, okay? Because that's where Joyce went to school, at University College, Dublin, there on St. Stephen's Green. But Hopkins contracted typhoid, which was more common then than you'd think, and probably from the rats in the sewer line. That's one of the, Dublin had undergone in the 1880s, at a time of Irish, the growth of Irish nationalism after, following the famine, and it had grown into it had undergone a kind of, what they used to call benign neglect, okay? In other words, what the British did is they pretty much pulled out resources out of Dublin, so that the great city that Dublin had been, say, under Swift and Goldsmith and Burke, that Ireland no longer was around. This was a city in decay, in great decay. There was no college for the vast majority of Irish Catholics. There was Trinity, and a few Catholics went there, but there was no place where most of the Irish young men could be educated. And so the Jesuits opened up a University College, Dublin, in 1883, and they maintained it until 1909, when it was turned over to the state. But it was much needed, and they needed teachers. And one of the teachers that was brought there somewhat against his will, because he was such a, what shall we say, kind of 110% British patriot, if you will, but learned, when it came to Ireland, learned, and within a year he was saying, home rule for the Irish. It has to be. You have to be here to see what's happening at ground zero to understand why this has to be the case. So he continued to grow even under duress. So let me just read a few passages here. The first is the opening. It's from chapter 1, in the breaking of the bread, Horsham and home. The world is charged with the grandeur of God, Hopkins believed. He believed it from his undergraduate years at Oxford as an Anglican seeker. Believed it so strongly that it led in large part to his conversion to the Roman Catholic Church. Believed it as a Jesuit, and called on both Ignatius's spiritual exercises and the insights of the philosopher Duns Scotus into Christ's incarnation to formulate a theodicy and a poetics which would articulate and sing what his whole self, head and heart, felt. And the evidence of that grandeur came to be everywhere for him, in the sublime Alps, as in violets and running streams, and in the 10,000 faces which reflected the very face of God. All that was wanting, he believed, was the beholder. And when the beheld and the beholder once met, when the essential nature of the thing was stressed upon the eye, ear, tongue, and mind, the heart could not help but rise up as at a sudden unheard symphony, a dance, the heart growing bold and bolder as it hurled itself after its creator, the one who bode there and abided. But to realize this way of seeing into the heart of things would eventually cost him everything, for it would mean giving himself over to this new reality, deeper and more satisfying than anything else he had ever felt, an unbearable lightness everywhere about us, and only the insulation of self-preoccupation keeping the self from feeling its staggering, terrifying sweetness and tenderness. More, Hopkins's own poetry would come to be charged with incarnating this same reality. It would be his response to the incredible gifts God had lavished on him as on others. His language, too, would come to be charged with a barbarously refined new energy, but only as he remained true to what he had been charged with doing, singing the earth's praise and bringing news to others of what he had been privileged to see and understand. It would be his overture responding to God's smile. He would not sing of himself as Whitman was singing of himself there in the New World, nor would he dwell on himself as Lucifer had done before his fall. Rather, he would direct himself outwardly toward the sublime other. At least, that was his dream, his reason for uttering his poems, though in time he would plunge deeper into the abyss of the stark self than any poet since Milton. Oh, we lash with the best or worst word last, he would come to understand. How a plush-capped, slow will mouth to flesh burst gush. Flush the man, the being with it, sour or sweet, brim in a flash full. That final yes or no to God's universe, of which he realized with honeyed exultation or salt bitterness he was but a mere spark, a floating mote, would be at the heart of it and provide for him on his journey, if that was what it was, through its unexpected protean shiftings. And not only for the years of philosophical inquiry, not only for the search at Oxford for what remained of Newman and Pusey's movement toward a more integrated Catholic vision, not only for his search for a religious community to which he could swear fraternal fidelity, whether as a contemplative with the Benedictines or with the Franciscans, or as it turned out with the Jesuits, together with Ignatius's vision of a contemplative order in action, serving wherever it was needed, as needed, like a soldier following orders. I did say yes, he would acknowledge, trembling at the memory of it. When at lightning and lashed rod God heard him, truer than tongue, confess thy terror, O Christ, O God. But was that confession a cry of surrender, or the cry of someone unable any longer to hold back the stress of something surging through the very marrow of his soul? It would be the beginning, too, of his realization that he would have to give up remaining where he was, on ground he understood, the symbolic remembrance of Christ in the Eucharist, because that way of seeing things was no longer enough. He would come to hunger after nothing less than the real presence, God actually indwelling in things as simple as bread and wine, and see it as the logical extension of God's indwelling among us, pitching his tent in the desert of ourselves so that he could speak to us as he had with Moses in the tent. Two look at the world around them. One thinks of oil or gold or another human being and puts a value on it or him or her. Another looks at the world and sees news of God's presence calling. Or two look at a piece of bread or a cup of wine and see bread or wine only, the quotidian, the physical thing itself, while another looks at the same two things and is shaken to the very core by the God-saturated reality brimming in the deepest self. And these ways of seeing come to make all the difference in one's life, one's thoughts, even in the way one comes to taste words. And so with Hopkins, who for complex reasons needed, he felt, to become a Catholic and better or worse, a Jesuit priest. Neither choice could possibly lead to preferment or even acceptance in his world, the world of late Victorian England. But they were, those choices, the logical outcome counter to the secular and agnostic cutting-edge thinking of his own day. Whether that thinker was Hegel or Lyell, Darwin or Freud. It would mean creating a radically new idiom that would lead to the renewal in possibilities of English, giving it back something of its original Anglo-Saxon force, besides recovering anew the all but forgotten beauties of plain chant. It would mean a poetry lettered and saturated with a language shimmering with the possibilities of a sacramental vision of the world around us. It would come to mean the possibility of actually renewing both the world and its words. So give it a day, a date, a going forth, a crossing over, all in an instant, finally, a yes and a yes again. Call it Wednesday, July 18th, 1866. Call it an out-of-the-way point somewhere south of London and name it Horsham. On a dull midsummer's day, with curds and away clouds faintly appearing and disappearing. Call it what he would, with its wondrous, irresistible forces working on him. The in-stress of it, like the ooze of virgin oil crushed in the press of God's hands, an anointing, a yielding, a yes. July 18th, 1866, Horsham. Hopkins, Gerard Manley, the Manley after his father, has been hiking in the fields and roadways around Horsham now for hours, listlessly observing the oaks and elms of the Sussex countryside, 100 miles to the south of London and his Hampstead home. He is just shy of his 22nd birthday, 5'4", thin, fair-haired and athletic, with a scrubby thin beard which does not become him. And while he can joke and banter with the best of them, he seems tired, tired beyond his years, tired of standing on the sidelines as the great appetitive world spins on. Isn't that what he himself had written the year before about the alchemist in the city pining for something, something substantial, something immortal as diamond, beyond the mere cloud-like transitoriness of it all? Like Moses, preparing to go out into the wilderness, calling to him beyond his too human concerns. My window shows the traveling clouds, he had written then. Leaves spent, new seasons, altered sky. The making and the melting crowds. The whole world passes. I stand by. Others build massive edifices of one kind or another to crown their days. Even birds build nests. But what of him, watching his life drift away in meaningless activity? They do not waste their meted hours, but men and masters plan and build. I see the crowning of their towers and happy promises fulfilled. And yet something, call it some ineffable mystery, has been calling to him, for he too, like so many of the earnest young starting out, would love to somehow turn the dross of the quotidian to gold. He too would pierce, if only he knew how, the yellow waxen light of the phoenix sun, with free, long looking ere I die. But that would mean surrendering, would it not? Giving up so much. The support of his family, his friends at Oxford, his tutors, his confessor Liddon, the magnetic Dr. Pusey, Urquhart, all those who have counseled him to keep within the Anglican Church into which he was born and raised by caring parents with close connections to that church. Nearly all his relatives are Church of England moderates, among them his mother and father and 7 siblings, of whom he is the oldest and the one to whom the younger ones look up. If he should go over to the Roman Church, if his imminent, quote, perversion, as his Anglican religionists prefer to name such defections, becomes a fact, it will mean loss of preference, loss of a university professorship at Oxford, loss of prestige among the majority of his countrymen, lookings askance, distrust, and the certain knowledge that his father especially will never understand, certain now that his poor, lost, prodigal son, with such a promising future ahead of him, and who has done so well at Oxford, will have gone mad from too much reading, and so gone over to the enemy. And all for what? Out of sheer self-will, to follow a chimerical vision, or to finally surrender and go over like his hero, John Henry Newman, and others before him, to the old Catholic faith, whatever the cost, if he is ever to find rest from his emotional mind. And yet, something like a colossal smile has been drawing him in that very direction. Not only his high church Anglican teachers and tutors, who are still part of this 30-year-old Oxford movement, which somehow survived even Newman's defection to Rome 20 years before, but churchmen like Pusey and Liddon and his protean, wind-wavering friend Urquhart, along with so many of his own Oxford contemporaries, undergraduates attending Anglican masses where vestments are worn, and incense burned, and confession in the form of the writing out of one's sins in exacting detail have become regular practices. Young men quivering like erratic magnets to take that last step of crossing over to Rome and only waiting for the time when the Spirit will summon them there. I'm going to fast forward now from 1866, nearly 20 years, to Dublin, 1885. Ah, the havoc and the glory of mortal beauty and of our complex responses to it. It is a topic Hopkins finds himself once more wrestling with during his retreat. There is, of course, Patmore's preoccupation with sexuality and Christianity. But there is another thing that has come to his attention, which is even more troubling. During his stay at Sydenham, Father Addis had told him in strict confidence that he had been seeing a woman, one of his parishioners. They had been very discreet. Let me just say a word about Addis. Addis is very important to him because Addis was slightly older than Hopkins, and it was Addis who had first brought him over to the Oxford movement when he was at Oxford, and he had been a kind of hero for him. And there had been a correspondence between Addis and Hopkins, but it's gone. Both sides of it are destroyed. There's just one or two little clips here or there that we have, okay? And now he learns that Father Addis, who had joined the oratory, Newman's order, and in a parish in London, has been seeing a parishioner, a woman, and is about to leave leave. And this, I think, just breaks Hopkins deeply. They have been very discreet, For surely, if the disgruntled female parishioner who has been watching him like a hawk had even suspected a liaison, there would be no need to take notes of Father Addis's sermons, for the other would be reason enough for his immediate dismissal. No doubt Hopkins has urged Addis, who has, like all parish priests, made a solemn promise of chastity, to end the relationship at once. But Addis is too deeply involved, and whatever he may have promised Hopkins, he will continue to see the woman until at last he leaves the priesthood and the church and subsequently marries her. And so now, in meditating on the Ignatian foundation and creation on that Sunday, August the 23rd, 1885, Hopkins composes a new sonnet, beginning with the question, "To what serves mortal beauty?" It is a poem that directly addresses God's purpose in creating physical beauty and our desire to possess it. But how possess it? He knows too well, as everyone learns sooner or later, that physical beauty has a deeply erotic charge, is dangerous, unsettling, and can set the blood dancing. That as charged as music can be, a beautiful or handsome face will throw us out of gaze and unbalance us in an instant, the image of the desired replaying itself over and over in the mind's eye until caution itself comes to count as nothing. Of course, that is what mortal beauty is meant to do, Hopkins knows. Keep warm men's wits to the things that are, to the power and wonder of the Creator who fans fresh our imaginations with so many possibilities. But, he insists, we are meant merely to meet it, acknowledge it, rather than stare it out of countenance until we begin to idolize it. For we will turn our attention to something, whether to the sacred or block or barren stone or calf or erotic image. Consider our own history, Hopkins says. English boys brought as slaves to Rome to be sold on the block, and all that entailed. Lovely lads once, wet, fresh windfalls of war's storm, and how Pope Gregory, catching sight of them in the Forum, was stirred to send missionaries to Britain to lift such a people from slavery into freedom. It is for us, then, to merely meet beauty, own it, home at heart as heaven's sweet gift, and then leave it alone, to wish instead for that better beauty, God's life in us. So he has warned himself many times over, maintaining a strict chastity of the eyes as he winds his way through the siren call of life's temptations. A few days later, as he meditates now on Christ's suffering, he composes yet another powerful sonnet, this one on refusing to give in to the temptation to despair. Whether as Geldart and Nash had, these were fellow Oxford students who had both committed suicide, or as Addis seems destined to do. Yes, he can feel his exhausted self going slacker and slacker, like a rope unraveling strand by strand. How easy to just let go the oar and under, feasting on the carrion comfort of despair, to cry out, "I can no more," as Newman's Gerontius had once cried out. Gerontian Manley, indeed, but no, there is something he can do. Hope. Wish the long night over and a beacon light shine his way. What in God's name is this crippling force, this thing that plays him as a cat plays a mouse or a lion its crippled prey? Why root on him, helpless as he is, his all-powerful ring-whirled right foot rock? Why toss him about like some winnower, tossing grain into the air in order to separate it from the chaff, if not that the grain that makes the bread might lie sheer and clear? Not, I'll not carry in comfort, despair, not feast on thee, not untwist, slack they may be, these last strands of man in me, or most weary cry, I can no more. I can something, hope, wish day come, not choose not to be, but oh, thou terrible, why wouldst thou root on me thy ring-whirled right foot rock? Lay a lion limb against me, scan with darksome devouring eyes my bruised bones, and fan, oh, in turns of tempest, me heaped there, me frantic to avoid thee and flee. And now in the midst of his retreat, he glimpses into the heart of the matter to see what has been going on all these many months. It is nothing less than his having wrestled with his own dark angel, and this his crucifixion. More, it is God he has been wrestling with all these years, breaking that stubborn will of his that would say yes, but always with a yet, and yet, and a yet. On retreat at Beaumont, exactly 2 years before, he had asked Christ and his mother to lift him up so that he might enter more completely into Christ's total emptying of himself on the cross. And now here he is, uttering the very words Christ spoke as he hung there, looking about, thirsting, uttering the opening lines of the 42nd Psalm, the very words misunderstood by those below, watching him die. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why? That my chaff might fly, my grain lie sheer and clear. Nay, in all that toil, that coil, since seems I kissed the rod. Hand rather, my heart low lapped strength, stole joy, would laugh, cheer. Cheer whom though? The hero whose heaven handling flung me, foot trod me, or me that fought him? Oh, which one? Is it each one? That night, that year of now done darkness I wretch lay wrestling with, my God, to soldier on then, regardless of what others do, including his fellow priests falling along the wayside. He has been given his orders, and in the spirit of his order, he will do his duty to the best of his failing abilities. And since his orders have called for him to be in Ireland, when he would rather be anywhere else, and to do the work, useless as it might seem, of examining and instructing a nation, many of whom resent his presence among them, why then, so be it. Soldiers. Why is it we feel a surge of pride when we see our soldiers parade smartly past in the uniforms, even when we know that among them must be the occasional rapist or slacker or thief or cold-eyed killer? And then finally, a short passage here at the end. Here we go. This is May now, May of 1889. He has finished writing his poetry. He's feeling very ill. Toward evening on the first day of May, he sends his mother a short note. You have not heard from me for very long, and now before going early to bed I write a line to say I am in some rheumatic fever, which comes very inconveniently when I should be and am setting my papers for the examinations. He had to examine the entire Ireland, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of papers in Greek and Latin, 6 times a year. Exhausting work, especially for someone as ill as he was. He hopes to be better tomorrow. If I am worse, I may see the doctor. I am your loving son. 2 days later, he writes his father. He is now laid up in bed with some fever, though he is still able to get around. This is the first day he has taken to bed altogether, he confesses, and he wishes now he had done so before. The pains are only slight, but I wish that Clement Scott and Isidore de Lara, the song's lyricist and composer, he had been hearing this song, this popular song of the time, played to piano, a 4-beat. On the grass of the cliff at the edge of the steep, God planted a garden of sleep. And he mentions this to his parents, and they wonder, why are you quoting that poem about the Garden of Sleep? And of course, it has a deeper significance. I wish, he says, that they would agree to plant a garden of sleep in my bed, as I am sleepy by day and sleepless by night, and do not rightly sleep at all. Yesterday he did see Dr. Redmond, who treated my complaint as a flea bite, a treatment which begets confidence but not gratitude. He remains your affectionate son, Gerard. On the envelope, Manley will later write Gerard's last letter. In the garden of sleep, where the poppies are spread, I wait for the living alone with the dead. O life of my life, on the cliffs by the sea, by the graves in the grass, I am waiting for thee. A flea bite, carrying the dreaded typhus. My dearest mother, he manages to write 2 days later. I am grieved that you should be in such anxiety about me, and I am afraid my letter to my father, which you must now have seen and ought, it seems to me, to have had before this morning's letter was sent, cannot much have relieved you. Still, he wants to reassure her that he is now in careful hands. Yesterday, Redmond visited him again and gave him a thorough examination. What is known is that he does have some fever, but what exactly has not declared itself. In the meantime, he is to have perfect rest and to take only liquid food until the suspended digestion, which has given him so much distress, has been cured. There is, he assures her, no hesitation or difficulty about the nurses with which Dublin is provided, I dare say, better than any place. Alas, about Lionel, that's his brother, the one who was close, who looked most like Gerard himself, but who was a confirmed atheist. Okay, so there was obviously a difference there between the two brothers. He says, he adds, I am and I long have been sad, feeling that his visits must be few and far between, and that I had so little good of this one, though he and I have so many interests in common and should find many more in company. And then he tries to buck up his worried parents. It is an ill wind that blows nobody good. My sickness falling at the most pressing time of university work, there will be the devil to pay. Only there is no harm in saying, that gives me no trouble, but an unlooked-for relief. Let somebody else do it. At many such a time I have been in a sort of extremity of mind. Now I am the placidest soul in the world. And you will see when I come round, I shall be the better for this. But he is writing uncomfortably now, and this is enough for a sick man. 3 days later, having been moved downstairs to a makeshift infirmary on the first floor of number 85, which has better light and air, Gerard sends another letter to his mother, thanking her for the flowers and trying once again to reassure her. Too weak now to hold a pen, he dictates the letter to Father Tom Wheeler, 42, vice president and minister at the university, who has taken over the task of nursing him. My fever, he has finally learned, is a sort of typhoid. It is not severe, and my mind has never for a moment wandered. It would give me little pain were it not that while it was incubating, I exposed my head to a cold wind and took neuralgia, which torments me now. Last night he slept well, and the nurse assigned to him from St. Vincent's Hospital down the road is first rate, and every condition is present that could make a serious thing trifling. The only complaint I have to make is that food and medicine keep coming in like cricket balls. On May 14th, Father Wheeler writes to reassure Hopkins's mother. I think he is now well round the corner and on the high road to mending. 2 days later, he signals a worried Bridges. That's Hopkins's close friend who would later become Poet Laureate of England. He signals a worried Bridges that his friend really does seem to be growing stronger now. And with that news, Bridges writes Hopkins, Dearest Gerard, he begins, I am sorry to get a letter from one of your people. He does not like Jesuits, by the way, Bridges. One of your people telling me that you were ill with fever. And yesterday I sent you off a budget of notes on Milton's prosody. And when I last wrote, I never mentioned your ailing, though you told me in your letter that you interrupted it to lie down. Now, Bridges was trained as a doctor, so he's trying to get all the information he can. What is this fever he has? Father Wheeler says that you are mending. Let me have a line. If only he could look in on him himself. Meanwhile, he will just have to be patient. On the other hand, if Gerard is really mending, Miltonic prosody will be just the sort of light amusement for your mind. But there will be no more letters. Hopkins has been diagnosed with typhoid, a fact which will prompt the Jesuit minister to have the sewage drains inspected a few weeks later. The staff cook has already reported seeing 2 rats in one of the stew pots. And Mr. McGarvey, the plumber, will submit a bill for a hefty 250 pounds, or Hopkins's salary for 7 months, for cleaning the college drains. It is work that should have been done when the Jesuits took over in 1883, but the price then seemed too steep for a college surviving on little in the way of hard cash. For the next 3 weeks, Hopkins seems to rally a bit and is visited by several of his Dublin friends. One of them is Margaret McCabe, who will remember long afterward Hopkins's innocence and humor and saintliness. And others too visit, among them his colleagues and fellow Jesuits. Bedridden, he is given the last rites of the church, makes his confession, receives the Blessed Sacrament, and is anointed. And while the official diagnosis is typhoid, it is quite possible that the illness has been made worse by another complaint, which will not even be named until 1932. Crohn's, a disease marked by constant fatigue. For years, Hopkins has complained of indigestion and diarrhea, as well as of exhaustion and the inability to work, though when younger he could walk and swim and run and climb with the best of them. But the symptoms look like typhoid, and typhoid in Dublin is as common as measles or smallpox or heart failure, and so typhoid is what he has been told he has. Whatever it is killing him. He sleeps, tries to keep a sense of humor, and jokes with friends. But by Wednesday evening, June the 5th, Father Wheeler, making his rounds, notices in the flickering gaslight a turn in Gerard for the worst. And immediately he sends off a letter to Hopkins's parents to come to Dublin as soon as they can. The following day, they are by his side in a Jesuit setting for the only time in their lives. He can see by their faces and by the fact that they are here now how worried they must be, and it hurts him. Strangely, though, what he feels is a deep calm. He has done in this life what he could, and now, 6 weeks short of his 45th birthday, he is leaving. The days are long now, the sun rising at 5 and setting at 10 each night. But all is shadow, and at times you can hear the muffled sound of distant waters whelming this wreck of himself. The darkness broken now and again by a beacon light condensing in the distance. Around noon on Saturday, June the 8th, exactly halfway round the solar year from that December day when the nuns called out to the only one, ipse per ipsum, et cum ipso et in ipso, and with his mother and father there in the room with him, the dark waves finally wash over his bed, and his fingers loosen, and he slips quietly away. Earlier that day, Father Wheeler, making his rounds, has heard Gerard talking to himself. He comes closer to try to make out what he is saying. I am so happy, he hears him whispering over and over. I am so happy. I am so happy.